never stop reading the Bible. We're talking about the opening chapters of the book of Romans. We'll be breaking down how the Apostle Paul builds this incredibly powerful case for three core ideas: sin, salvation, and faith. Right at the heart of this whole thing is a concept called the gospel. Now, Paul defines it not as just a set of rules, but as the actual power of God that brings salvation. This one idea, it's the engine that drives everything else we're about to explore. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll start with some quick background on the letter itself, then we'll walk through Paul's argument chapter by chapter, and finally we'll wrap it all up with three key takeaways. So what exactly is this letter to the Romans? Well, it's not some casual note. You have to see it as a deliberate, systematic presentation of the Christian faith, and it's all designed to be understood logically. Let's get into the details. The backstory here is pretty fascinating. Paul wrote this before he'd ever even been to Rome. It was basically his introduction, laying out his complete understanding of the faith. And he builds his entire case around these three themes: sin, salvation, and faith. Let's see how he kicks it off by establishing the problem: sin. Okay, so in chapter 1, Paul doesn't jump in with a solution. Nope, he starts with the problem. He lays the groundwork for a universal issue that, he argues, affects every single human being on the planet. His opening volley is that the gospel is even necessary because the world has fallen short. He makes the case that everyone, no matter your background or culture, is in a state of sin. And because of that, we're all in need of a divine solution. And he's not kidding about the scope of this problem. Who does this apply to? According to Paul's logic, it's everyone, no exceptions. No one gets a pass. This right here is the foundational premise that his entire argument is built on. But wait, what about the obvious objection, right? What about religious people or people who have a really strong moral code? Well, in chapter 2, Paul turns his attention directly to that group, arguing that, there are no special exemptions. Paul's logic here is just razor sharp. He says that for the Jewish people of his day, just having God's law wasn't enough. The standard wasn't just knowing the rules, it was perfectly obeying them. He's directly challenging religious pride, basically saying that even having a perfect moral compass doesn't make you righteous if you fail to follow it. This chart really nails the distinction he's making. He's constantly contrasting this outward status, things like your religious identity or going through rituals, with the inward reality. What really matters, he argues, isn't the external label. It's the internal state of your heart, your faith, your actual obedience. And this, of course, leads to a fantastic question. If having the law doesn't save you and not having it doesn't excuse you, then what was the point of the law in the first place? Paul knows you're going to ask that, and his answer is the pivot point for the entire letter. Which brings us to the climax of the argument in chapter 3. After proving there's a universal problem with absolutely no exceptions, Paul finally unveils the divine solution. And here is the brilliant twist. The law was never, ever meant to be the cure. It was meant to be the diagnosis. It's like a spiritual X-ray that reveals the problem with perfect clarity. It shows us exactly where we fall short and proves we can't fix this problem ourselves. So the logical flow is just perfect. The law shows us our sin that leads us to the realization that, whoops, we can't save ourselves. And it's at that exact moment of helplessness that God's grace steps in and provides a brand new path. One you don't access by trying harder, but simply through faith. So what is this righteousness Paul keeps talking about? Well, in his way of thinking, it's not something we earn, like a paycheck for a job well done. It's a right standing with God that's given to us freely, as a gift. And just like any gift, you can't earn it. You can only receive it. Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. Let's pull it all together by looking back at those three core themes we started with and figure out the main takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is about sin. According to Paul's argument, sin isn't just a list of bad things you do. It's a fundamental, universal human condition. It's the baseline that affects everyone equally, and that creates the need for a solution that's also available to everyone. The second big takeaway is all about salvation. The key insight here is that the solution is not a reward for our good behavior or moral effort. Instead, it's presented as a total gift of grace from God, completely separate from our own achievements. And finally, faith. What role does it play in all this? Well, faith isn't the work that earns salvation. Instead, Paul presents it as the open hand. It's the channel, the means through which that gift of God's grace is actually received. It's the act of saying yes to the gift being offered. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. How does that shift in thinking from a system where you're trying to earn your way to righteousness to one where you just freely receive it as a gift? How does that fundamentally change a person's perspective on life, on failure, and on their relationship with God? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. The source for today's content is the Center Studio.